Hello, friends. So, this is going to be my last upload for a little while. I'm going to be traveling around Korea for a few months, so I won't be able to upload. With that said, my goal here is to impart as much knowledge as possible to you so that you can adjust your pool plan according to your own situations and, maximize the amount of enjoyment you get out of this game. Um, Keep in mind that everything I talk about is usually within a meta-based framework. So things like the end game environment itself are very consequential to my analysis. Okay, and so this is kind of like the table of contents right now that I'm going to try and cover. Um, but before we go banner by banner, we need to talk about some context related stuff first because it's important to establish, right? We're currently in patch 3.2 and we're looking ahead to patch 3.4. Okay. Taking a look at the total pools available to us, we have about 41 pools remaining that we can get once Broom releases here in about um, slightly under 2 weeks, or maybe just 2 weeks. And then in patch 3.3, we're going to get about 87 pulls. And in patch 3.4, we'll be getting 114 pulls, right? So this is based on the free to play um, pull income. And then if you add the roaring monthly, it's going to be 290. And then the roaring plus the jukebox is going to be 300. So even with that said, because this is CN numbers, we can plus minus about 5 pulls in either direction, I believe. So keep that in mind when you think about how you're going to be planning your pulls. And then we have this unique situation where we have to sort of consider the atomic heart collaboration as well, right? It's pretty much confirmed that global is getting 3.3 next patch, which means that CN is going to be getting 3.5 next patch, right? This is predicated on the fact that Voyages of Volatility, right, is ending in patch 3.2. And it's highly unlikely that Blue Park will develop voyage stages specifically just for global for the Atomic Heart collaboration, right? If it was to come right after this patch, so that would be highly unlikely. Um, and it's also highly likely that the replacement, which is going to be Tide of Thoughts, is going to be the updated version, which makes the sort of grindiness or the grind aspect of that mode considerably easier, right? And it will allow us to use multiple sort of P0 teams and not just rely on Lingering Glow, Broom Dynamo, and Blood Tithe to accrue points. So, my prediction regarding the Atomic Heart collaboration is that it will be after patch 3.3. So approximately around mid-April. So before 3.4 is ideally when we will probably get the collaboration. So my estimation is that it's the sort of perfect revenue window in terms of appeasing both the CM player base as well as to sort of drain the majority of resources before patch 3.4 releases on global, right? This not only sort of like capitalizes on the influx of players from patch 3.2, then patch 3.4 for CN, but it also gives that like a bit of respite or a cooldown period, right? For the majority of the player base to accrue some unilogs, right? For those that don't spend, this is crucial, right? Um, as far as what I sort of anticipate for the collab units themselves, it has to be enticing enough for CN to pull after Paper Heron, but at the same time, it can't directly compete so that global with global's foresight just completely ignores Paper Heron, right? So this will maximize the double dip or the fear of missing out aspect for global, but keeping a level of stability for the CN player base. Okay, remember that when AC collab happened, it was a guaranteed either Ezio or Cassandra, depending on which banner you're pulling on. It was a guaranteed copy at, I believe it was 100 pulls, right? So anticipate there being a lot of people that are going to be swayed into pulling, regardless of their affinity for the IP itself, right? I'm sure they'll make, if the IP isn't as widely appealing as Assassin's Creed, they'll make up for it in a way through the character kits, right? But beyond that, I'm not going to speculate on much else. And in this video, I'll just be focusing on every banner from now until the end of 3.4, as though we don't have a collaboration to consider, right? This is just my prediction on when the ideal time would be for the Atomic Heart collaboration. But then, so lastly, last bit of housekeeping. It's important to establish what kind of meta-focused player you are, okay? So there's type A, who is sort of meta-conscious, right? Generally meta-focused, but not hyper-fixated on endgame optimization. And secondly, wants assurances that investments have longevity and sufficient strength to get the job done when they do decide to tackle endgame more seriously. I'm sure a lot of you can relate. I'm sure a lot of you that juggle multiple gachas can relate to this. I certainly can. I do play multiple gachas, and because this is my main game, the games that I take a lot less seriously, I would sort of, just be following the meta trend, so to speak, so that if I do have the time to tackle, sort of the end game, then I would do so, right? And then type B is the meta endgame player, right? Content clear oriented, and then pulls strictly for utility needed to clear content. Often looks for the minimum requirements necessary to beat stages or events, tends to have a wide range of characters, right? I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this pull as well. So this isn't to say that these are fixed, right? There's going to be overlap between these three different types of meta-focused players, but the thing is that this is kind of like the general outline of where people kind of stand when it comes to their gacha of choice, right? And then type C is the meta competitor, the whale slash leaderboard chaser, right? High investment players focused on rankings and pulls for high portraits to compete on leaderboards and maximize score skillings. Okay, so this is kind of the the extreme minority, especially in reverse, right? Because simply put, we don't have a great return on investment, all things considered. If we go all the way to like P5, for instance, right, the longevity of the character isn't extended, to a crazy amount that we can really justify doing that unless you are a whale. So this camp, type A, would be more the free-to-play territory, right? The majority of players will be in this camp. And then type B will be the free-to-play slash sort of veteran player base, along with the dolphins that need to actually pay for pools in order to get everything that they need, right? And then type C is the extreme minority, right? And then we take a look at the sort of environments that we have for endgame, right? Starting from 3.2, I'm sure you've already experienced the sort of stark difference in Main's bulletin now, where it is, by all accounts, it is like a raid in a sense, right? The truest sense of a raid encounter, if you compare it to like a different game, right? And then we have Wailing Well, up to 1,000 meters and beyond if you want to push beyond. And then we have Tide of Thoughts, right? These are the three main types of endgame content. I should have ordered it slightly differently, where Wailing Well is kind of like a continuation between, it's a continuation from Reveries itself, right? And then Main's bulletin is a step above, and then Tide of Thoughts is a step above even Main's bulletin, right? So the free to play camp, right? The meta conscious type A player is going to be hovering, I would assume, between 400 meters, right? 400 to 450 meters would be the majority of these players will be hovering here, and they'll be dabbling in pushing certain stages in 500 meters, right? And also they'll likely, if they push this far, they'll likely be setting up teams for Wailing Well. Okay, they just don't have the amount of characters necessary in order to clear 1,000 meters, right? And then you have the meta endgame players who will likely have cleared all of 500 meters, have significantly either pushed into Wailing Well or completed it up to 1,000 meters at least, right? And then when we consider Tide of Thoughts, it's kind of like the same deal, where it's a continuation from that jumping off point, right? We have we have these bosses that we customize, right? We input separate modifiers in order to get a higher yielding point system, right? And that way we can accrue or gather all the sort of permanent rewards, as well as completing the daily aspect of it, right? Or the weekly or the patch by patch aspect of it, right? So I hope that kind of clarifies the environment in which I want to be basing my recommendations on, right? If we're looking as far back as like Reveries in the Rain, for instance, it's such an old piece of content now that the relevance, outside of like 500 meters or using 450 meters as like a sort of DPS check, I guess, like the relevance just isn't there anymore. Like it was, 400 meters was clearable, back in like 2.5, right? So that relevance is kind of diminished, but these other three types of content still remain pretty relevant, even up to the end of 3.4. And ideally, I'm hoping that we get a new piece of endgame for once 3.6 arrives, right? I believe that would be a good timing, where people are starting to get exhausted by the Main's bulletin and Tide of Thoughts loop in CN. Okay, so now we can move on to finally talking about the banners themselves. And Anjanala is going to be releasing here in about a day and a half, right? So these are sort of my pros and cons for Anjanala. If you're taking Anjanala as a standalone unit, right, outside of the Brume archetype composition, she is a versatile early and mid-game character, right? So if you're a new player and you have access to a lot of pools, right, you complete all of the story and you have about 300 pulls, along with the fact that this is an anniversary patch. So she's a versatile early to mid game unit, and she's going to help you clear a lot of stages without relying on specific units, simply because she's strong in general, as well as being able to provide debuffs and controls, right? And then additionally, if you already own Anjanala from her 2.2 debut, you know, she's an extremely strong Euphoria upgrade, and you should definitely get her, right? But the problem is when talking about the cons, her partners that she binds to is limited, right? She has Kalabauna or Bauna, and she has Beryl playing the blue build, right? Where the lingering glow amount doesn't matter as much. And then she has Liang, which is kind of not really that great, right? All things considered, Liang in 3.2 isn't that great of a unit. And then you have to consider the banner structure itself, where it is a limited rerun banner in the sense that there's no pity or carryover. It still is an average of 63 pulls to actually pull the banner unit, which is Anjanala. And then the ceiling is 140, right? So there is that. But then we have to think about Anjanala with Brume, right? This is the most important part of why we stress, or why I stress Anjanala at the moment, right? Pros with Brume, she is the strongest, or this archetype is the strongest P0, Portrait 0 DPT, in both single target and AoE, right? Up to 10 rounds. Okay, if we go beyond that, there is Corvus to consider, who's going to scale a lot harder than that, right? And then this composition also has the second strongest survival options through debuffs that she provides through her ult, as well as control in the form of the charm itself, right? And we're going to need a lot of that stuff for Tide of Thoughts. Okay, it's going to help you push those higher numbers, right? So this composition has longevity in Wailing Whirl and Tides, right? And it's going to allow you to steamroll through the majority of the Reveries in the Rain descent down to 500 meters, right? And then you can use this composition as like your 600 meter push, right? At P0, with rank 13, you'd probably be able to take out at least like 170 meters just with this composition, right? Starting at 600. But the cons, we have to consider the cons with Brume as well, which is that, well, I'll elaborate on this on the next slide, but she's forcibly retired in mains, right? If we go to the current existing mains lineup, right? Go to the current existing mains lineup, we have this boss right here. Cocooned Lament is a plant-based mains boss. This doesn't reappear ever again in the next 3 patches. So what that means is that we have to play Brume with this particular plant boss. But then this plant raid boss has a mechanic where it will forcibly stun a character if they're channeling multiple follow-up attacks, right? It's going to be a stacking debuff, and when you hit the number 3, it's been a long time since I've done it with Brume, you get stunned for two rounds, right? And you can't bypass it with Marsha or Kiparina and the like, right? So that is a huge problem. And then secondly, her rotation relies on drawing S1, which is her adaptive card, right? If you're not pulling for the adaptive card, which does the follow-up attacks, then you can't generate Dynamo. You can't be feeding Anjanala Moxie. So that remains a huge problem. If you're unlucky, right? But usually that's it's not a big deal, right? So my verdict for Anjanella is that she's highly recommended if you intend to play Broom Dynamo, specifically if you own Karen already, right? This is, you can argue that you don't have to play with Anjanella, and I'll get to that when I talk about Broom. But for now, just understand that. And then skip if only playing the follow-up attack version, right? With Kalabona, Barrel, or Liang Yue, just not particularly great. Almost rivals the rank up team in terms of DPT at P0. It's just too old to be pulling for just that, right? In 3.4, however, binding with Euphoria Liang Yue is acceptable. Waiting for 3.4 is acceptable as well, but it's not recommended. When I talk about characters, people don't seem to consider longevity all that much, and that is a huge issue, right? When you think about Blood Tithe, you understand that it had a longevity from starting from 2.8 all the way to, I guess, around about 3.3, right? In main's bulletin, it's not great because it's not afflatus advantaged, and also in Tide of Thoughts, it's not all that great either because the incoming damage is single hit, large single hits, right? Which Robuska has a hard time dealing with. And the Blood Tithe generation itself therefore lags behind. If you're considering P0, that is. So, last bit of thing with Anjanella is that she is a limited rerun, but she is also getting another limited rerun, if you can call it that, in 3.4, right? We have a banner called From the Lake's Heart, and you choose either Jiu, Lucy, or Anjanella. Okay, and the strongest character here would be undoubtedly Anjanella, unless by the time we get to 3.4, Lucy gets her second Euphoria. So that kind of remains to be seen, obviously, but you know, it's from this position, from our current position, Anjanella is the strongest choice here. And you could opt to wait, right? If you don't have enough pulls, but you do have Karen, you do have Ulrich, you do have Flutter Page, then you can just pull Broom and opt to wait until 3.4 and decide then if you want Anjanella, right? If you're not specifically chasing those tiers, right? You're sort of in the type A camp. Then you can opt to do that, especially if you like the character design or you're pulling for the skin, right? Or you're buying the skin, not pulling for the skin. Okay, moving on to Broom. So Broom's gonna be releasing in just about 2 weeks, right? Because I'm on New Zealand time, so it's a little different. Pros is that she's the strongest P0 output in the game. That is her niche, the strongest P0 character in the game, right? I cannot stress that enough. She is the strongest P0 character in the game. And by extension, she is the strongest beast unit in the game, probably exceeding, 3.4, right? She is still the strongest beast unit in 3.4. She also has a very static rotation priority with Anjanella. How it works is that, like, once you get into the cycle of Anjanella being able to use her ultimate, right, it's going to continuously chain that. You're going to continuously be chaining that card priority until the match finishes, right? Until the encounter is done. So it's very easy to work. right? That you don't really have to consider a whole lot when you play this composition with Anjanala. Okay. And then the cons are that she does suffer from poor scaling with portraits compared to, I don't want to get it mistaken, so people end up confused or taking things out of context, compared to the likes of, barrel or paper heron, right? As a standard unit, it's sufficient, but consider that Brume doesn't have the scaling that a character like Corvus does, right? The reason why I pulled for P5 Corvus, a lot of people did pull for P5 Corvus, is that the scaling aspect is also insane when it comes to portraits, right? So as a standard banner unit, I don't recommend pulling for her portraits if you're a free-to-play or a dolphin, right? And then I talked about this in the last slide, but she was retired from the core endgame environment, right? And because if you're playing with Anjanala, you need a specific card rotation where you funnel all of Brume's cards before Anjanala uses her ultimate, right? You can only play manually, right? Otherwise, the game will mess up your entire entire cycle. Okay. Then the key differences between Anjanala and Ulrich, right? A lot of people don't really understand, so they hover between, why bother getting Anjanala at all, right? Anjo can ult every round with Brume. This is a massive increase in damage for Anjanala, right? For Brume, it's just consistent with her being partnered with anyone else. That's Dynamo. But for Anjanala, this is a huge net positive in a Afflatus positive fight, right? When you're fighting against a plant-based raid boss or encounter, this is where this will skyrocket you damage, right? Alongside the fact that Anjanala provides that immense amount of defensives in the form of debuffs and control. And then with Ulrich or Flutter Page, right? Say that you don't pull on Anjanala, but you have Ulrich and Flutter Page. The key differences here is that Brume can still ult every round. However, the DPT suffers significantly on an Afflatus positive fight, right? Again, if you're fighting a plant fight, then the DPT will suffer immensely compared to Anjanala. However, on an Afflatus neutral fight, right? Think about the mains bulletin boss that came out for 3.4. On an Afflatus neutral fight like this, where it's Star Afflatus, right? Ulrich and Flutter Page variations yield higher DPT, right? Compared to running Anjanala, forcing Anjanala into that environment, right? And then here, I provided the portrait increases from my calculations. You can see it's pretty consistent. My stopping point that I would recommend for whales is portrait 5. But if you're whaling, you might as well go to, stopping point would be portrait 4, but if you're whaling, you might as well go to portrait 5, right? But for free-to-play and dolphins, portrait 0 is the ideal stopping point for this character. She does not need portrait 1 unless you're specifically trying to play her with Corvus, and even then, it relies on a bit of card RNG as well in order to make that work. Not smoothly, because it won't be smooth sufficiently, right? The win condition of Brume ulting as well as Corvus ulting. The problem just there is that there's just not enough AP to work with, right? So yeah, here you can see the portraits. So my verdict for Brume is that she is a must pull. She's the strongest P0 archetype in the game for over 3 months, right? Longevity really matters when you take this into account. So 6 months down the line, we're going to have stronger units, obviously, a baseline of a a DBT baseline that rivals this composition at minimum, right, when they release. So, and that's also considering that they come up with a new endgame environment, which it's likely to be Reveries 2.0, right? That's really all I can summarize, right? Bluepock isn't really known for their crazy levels of creativity, but what works really well, or what has worked really well in terms of incentivizing people to pull sort of on a more subtle end, right? Where it's not glaringly obvious that you're pulling just to make sure that your inflate is positive for the patch's sort of mains bulletin, right? Reveries will be that key environment, right? Even if like you go beyond that character's life cycle, there might be a certain niche that character has, so that will still incentivize people to pull, and so on. Okay, and then skip if you're free to play. This is important. I get asked this so many times. You want to skip Broom if you don't have Karen and you don't have Anjanala, right? You can't be pulling for both, and you don't want a subpar version of this composition with Karen while trying to make it work with Flutter Page, right? That is a much inferior version of this composition. So if you don't fulfill the requirements of having either or, you should be skipping this, right? You should be skipping Broom, right? And then Ulrich or Flutter Page variations acceptable only with Anjo or Karen. I kind of, clarifying this point here. You have to have either one to make Broom worth pulling. Also, like, this goes without saying, if you're stuck on like a beast stage, or if you need certain beast main DPSs and so on, she will be the best choice there by far, right? Okay, moving on to Marsha. There's really not much to say about Marsha. I've given many an in-depth talk about both Marsha and Broom actually, but to reiterate, if you're sitting here right now watching this in 3.2 and you have you have like 40 pulls, right? And you pulled on barrel and you have 40 pulls remaining, you save those pulls for Marsha, right? You cannot miss a key unit like this, especially on global, right? And on CN, we have a static rerun schedule, but on global, we don't have that. And like as not, global tends to pair these high value units in yearning banners, and they won't be exactly 3 months later. They're going to be, 3.5 months or 4 months or even longer than that, depending on whether or not they're going to be vital to a new character that's releasing. So keep that in mind. You really can't miss or can't excuse yourself. Sorry, getting some water. From actually pulling for Marsha. Okay, so going over the pros real quick. She's the most versatile sustain in the game. There's really no debate. She has a strong Moxie engine. She auto shields. She does AoE damage. She auto cleanses, and she also absorbs CC. All right, like there's nothing like this character in the game, right? Kiparina is a close second, however, right? More importantly, though, Marsha bypasses control gimmicks, which we'll see a lot more of when the raid meta ends, right? In the current existing raid meta, we don't really worry too much about control unless we're doing Tide of Thoughts, right? Tide of Thoughts, there's all sorts of different afflictions, but if you're playing with Marsha, you can basically ignore them and be able to push points a lot higher than you normally would if you would have to lower your DPT in order to deal with the mechanics of the fight itself, right? So she allows you to just basically bypass mechanics. Okay, and for cons, she doesn't have any. There's no cons with this character. I also gave an evaluation in terms of her portraits in the context of the Lingering Glow lineup, which is going to be Beryl, Isolde, Flutterpage, and Marsha, right? So her portraits are consistent with support portraits for their specific archetype, right? I don't recommend anybody that isn't chasing a leaderboard score to be pulling from Marsha's portraits, but instead make sure that she's level 60, make sure that she's as highest resonance that you can push, and that's going to be enough, right? You want her shield efficacy to be as strong as possible, which is just, you know, easy as improving your AP or attack power, sorry. And then talking about Igor, right? I'm sure if you've been following my commentary, I've always been sort of lukewarm when it comes to Igor, starting from, you know, the initial calculations that I did for him. So what are his pros, right? He's 3 times the DPT upgrade to the existing ritual team, right? If you can consider Recoleta, Melania, Moldier, and Medpark to be the 3.2 up to 3.2 ritual team, right? Then Igor with his daughters plus Marsha is going to be 3 times the DPT. That's it. He doesn't really bring anything unique. He can be CC immune. I don't think that really matters, especially once Marsha comes into the picture, right? When he ults, he becomes CC immune, right? The cons, a lot of cons with this character. Encouraged to be played with both daughters, right? What that means is that here, the value proposition plummets if you have to pull for Lopera or Moldier or both, right? If you already have Lopera, if you already have Moldier, then getting either one of them is not going to hurt quite as much, but it is you pulling for a much older character, right? In 2026. And then the P0 performance is underwhelming in all environments save Reveries, okay? Whether it's Main's Bulletin or Tide of Thoughts or Wailing Well, the damage just for a new release character, if you compare it to a character like Brume, very average, right? And then Feng Yang did a DPR analysis. So I haven't actually done mine, so we're just going to be using Feng Yang's here on out. So his P0 DPR with his daughters, I believe, is around, 1.3. Again, pretty average. But then his portrait scaling isn't bad. It's just like, why? When when you have access to Brume, it's like, why do you go above and beyond for Igor? He can be used to compete once he has P5, but this is also reliant on the fact that you have a high portrait Lopera and Multier. I mean, I don't want to get into the high investment aspect of it, but yeah, do you really want to be investing on those characters at this point in time? I would not, but his sort of insights are that P1 is an extreme quality of life when played with Flutter Page, right? If you don't have Muldir, you can play him with alternative characters, but the thing is, they won't be able to generate enough moxie for him, right? But with his P1, he will be able to generate enough moxie when he's playing without his daughters, at least one daughter that is, and therefore he's still usable, right? He wants to, his win condition is that he ults every single round, right? And then P5, Igor ults twice per turn, right? You would think it would be, you know, an insane amount of damage increase, but the problem is that the second ult does not benefit from these shells because his shells are absorbed by the first barrage that comes with the first ult, right? So we're wish casting here, but ideally, like a Lopera Euphoria or a Muldir Euphoria would be able to extend sort of the shell duration, right? Instead of having it be consumed immediately. And then my verdict is that he is a skip for the majority of players. And my reasoning is that the only reason to be pulling on Igor is if you're still working on Reveries and Wailing Well, or you already own Muldir and Lopera. Right? There's really not much more I can add to that. Igor's longevity is based on the likelihood of Muldir or Lopera receiving Euphoria updates related to the ritual archetype. And then I added, this is speculation obviously, but there is a low chance if Atomic Heart is between 3.3 and 3.4, it might cater a character to this end, right? If CN doesn't get a character in the form of like a Euphoria update in patch 3.5 for Igor, which would incentivize Global to be pulling for Igor, right? The latest that they can be releasing an update to this archetype would be during the Atomic Heart collaboration, right? Beyond that, the longevity has run its course already, and you would honestly just be saving for the either the collaboration itself or the next anniversary, right? Okay. Paper Heron. There's a lot of pros to this character. So, Paper Heron is a vast upgrade to the existing plant lineup that is the rank up team, right? Offensively and defensively capable team at P0 on release. By that I mean that for the most part, it is a complete team. There isn't a glaring hole like we currently experience with Lingering Glow before Marsha, right? We don't generate enough either Lingering Glow or be able to stack burn well enough, right? And so Paper Heron, conversely, has all of the holes kind of, you know, patched out, right? She is completely viable out the gate with Tooth Fairy, Ananli, or Mercuria, or Baccarola, and Kipperina, right? Third point is that her presence can alter Starflatus to become Shotgun when paired with Baccarola. I know this is like making a bit of a oh my god, this is crazy kind of reaction from people, but the thing is, nobody on CN talks about this. The reason is that there is no environment to do this in, to get benefit out of this outside of just Reveries, right? So it's the usefulness is predicated on mineral-based mains, right? Otherwise specific to reveries only. You can make the argument that you could use that for Staroflatus Tide of Thoughts, but why would you when you can just do plant, right? Um, Plant-based impromptu sustain, while unlikely due to Kipperina's stranglehold on the archetype, could possibly see it reach higher DPT levels. Right, it's either going to be a sustain, or it's either going to be the position that NN Lee kind of currently holds, sort of as a placeholder, right? We're not opposed to a trade-off when it comes to more damage in favor of getting a defensive buff, for instance, right? Because ultimately, the quicker you kill something, you know, the less mechanics you have to deal with, the less damage taken you need to be worried about, right? So my verdict regarding Paper Heron is that she is a must pull. She has the highest turn 1 to turn 5 DPT, so early game, right? But we don't have an environment where that is useful unless you're still working on reveries, right? So it has no setup, comes out swinging. They just initially start with like, you know, 1 mil DPT off the bat on turn 1. It's kind of insane. And then the second point here is that extremely easy to pilot, right? Very easy to play, but also has a high skill ceiling, right? You already know that Star Afflatus Impromptu is very easy to play. You can just hit autoplay and it just plays itself, right? Just fine. But the thing is, that version of Impromptu also has a high skill ceiling, and the same goes with this composition as well, where you can see a variation between, like, if you were to take the current mains bulletin, for instance, right? You can see variations between, you know, 20 mil, and I believe the person who's like trying to push this as much as possible, they're currently at like 28 mil, right? And that is in the context of using the sort of recommended archetype with Paper Heron, Tooth Fairy, Ananli, and Kipperina, right? And they don't have, like, they're not hiding behind the fact that they're P0, but they're all rank 15 or anything. I believe they're rank 13 on 2 characters. But either way, it's a very impressive achievement. But it also comes down to RNG a little bit as well. Okay. And then another core point is that team assembly is extremely easy. So many people that have been playing Reverse for, you know, 6 months or longer already own Tooth Fairy, Anan Lee, and Mercuria, right? Through just spooking characters while they're trying to pull, right? Blue Pock also provides ample opportunities to get them for cheap, either through the Ripples banner or through the 100 free pull, which I'll be covering later on. And then the third point that I wouldn't usually put in a must pull category, but she does have incredible portrait scaling, right? She has barrel levels to begin with, right? You see the top row, right? About a 209% increase if you go to P5, but it's exacerbated by Tooth Fairy, right? And at this point, you can argue that why are you looking at 2 characters worth of portraits to showcase how strong a character is, but I'll get to it in a second. So this here on the left side is Tooth Fairy's portraits, right? If Tooth Fairy is at P5 and Paper Heron is at P5, 400 or 343% damage increase, which is absurd for just 2 characters. It's actually insane for 2 characters. Right. There's really not much more to say. If I were to elaborate on this aspect, um, Tooth Fairy has a lot of opportunities where you can pull for her coming up, which I'll get into, as well as sort of easy ways to obtain her portraits as well, which I'll also get into. Okay. And then we have to talk about Euphoria Liang Yue. Right? She got a massive Euphoria update. It works extremely well in the current raid meta. Excuse me. So what I mean by this is that the penetration scaling is incredible for Liang Yue, which makes her performance that much better in a raid meta environment, where she can shred basically the boss's defense, right? So if you're fighting bosses that have a high amount of defense, then she really does perform exceptionally well. And also the second point is that she has the highest skill ceiling, or she is the highest skill ceiling based 6-star in the game, right? In terms of merging cards and card management and where you execute those cards, or when you execute those cards, she has an incredible amount of depth to her playstyle. And then thirdly, she has a diverse array of teammates. So she has a lot of teammates that she can work with. To name a few would be like Flutterpage, Mercuria, Six, Anjanala, Chongogong, Kipperina. She's just really all around really great. So she can synergize decently with a lot of characters. And then for cons, again, this can be a con for a lot of people, right? High skill ceiling, 6-star in the game. You don't want to be playing her auto if your intent is to clear something that is a DPT check, right? You can't just mindlessly play her cards. You have to be very thoughtful in how you execute and be lining them up with your correct buffs and so on. And then the second point for cons is that she lacks a mains bulletin environment. So you might be wondering why that's a con, but it is. Like, we're in a raid meta at the moment, and to not have a mineral based mains is is quite problematic, right? And then lastly, it's the banner structure itself, right? I think to go back to this point, I think they learned from Brume, where they did give that one plant stage, and then they kind of like backed away as soon as they saw that people were hitting 25 mil plus at P0. Conversely, you look at Barrel's performance in her sort of intended raid, right? She has trouble breaking 15 mil at P0, right? And then the the banner structure is obviously that it doesn't have any carryover. 63 average pulls again, 140 hard pity, right? Just for a single copy. So basically, if you're sitting on Liang Yue or high portrait Liang Yue, you've essentially won the lottery. So my verdict is that she's highly recommended, again, similar to Anjanala. Euphoria update proved to be exactly what Liang Yue was missing, right? Auto, ult, and so on, right? Her penetration or green playstyle suits the high defensive environments very well. And then her permanent alt uptime coupled with it being 0 AP. Right. So at the moment she is without heguang, right? At the moment she is a Tide of Thoughts specialist. She's also extremely strong in reveries if you're still catching up by 3.4, right? Obviously won't work quite as well in Wailing Well, but you know you can make do and adjust your ordering. And then I can't really talk too in depth about heguang, but we can sort of go off of the initial kit analysis, right? The pros is that he's a versatile sub DPS, right? His engine is fueled by his allies performing attacks or follow-up attacks, right? Again, the cons, this is a weak con, right? The environment, right? Again, doesn't have the mineral mains, so until Reveries 2.0 comes out, he's kind of relegated to being that, you know, that ladder unit that helps people descend and catch up in Reveries in the Rain, and as well as Wailing Well. So my verdict, without knowing his multipliers, is that he is still a must pull, right? Based on kit analysis, all signs point towards a core sub DPS duo with Liang Yue, right? But him by himself, right, is a follow-up unit that's triggered by follow-up attacks. He has a 0 AP ult. He reduces the hand limit. He has continuous action AP, and he has a very strong Moxie engine that he doesn't really need to worry too much about, right? He goes straight back into his ult state. So even before multipliers, Euphoria Liang Yue alone is sitting at P0. Yeah. Euphoria Liang Yue alone is sitting at P0 Lingering Glow levels of DPT, right? Around the 1.7 mil mark, right? Which heguang will amplify, right? Depending on how well you play Liang Yue, and then it's going to just get easier with heguang, right? That's going to boost Liang Yue's DPT. So I wouldn't be surprised if they end up being as strong as Plant Impromptu. And then he provides, you know, crit damage, incantation might, follow-up attack, bonus damage, and continuous action. Right? There really isn't too much that I can sort of go into here beyond that. So the ripples on the water, in the water, banner. Starting with 3.2, the only character that you should be concerning yourself with if you need to pull, right? Consider that ripples is much cheaper to get your the 6-star of your choice, right? For the first attempt. The hard pity is at 70, and then the average pull till you get the character is 39. If you consider the discount on the first pull as well, right? So the only character that you should be considering here is Isolde, and only Isolde if you've pulled on Beryl, right? Outside of that, nothing here is pull worthy. You already understand that we only have about like a 300 pull income from now till the end of 3.4. So you have to be quite frugal, especially if you're free to play, in how you what banners you target and how you prioritize the meta archetypes that you want to build, right? And then in 3.3 we have the standout units would be Ananli and Mercuria. Obviously, if you can't pull for Isolde in 3.2 due to a lack of pulls, then this can be an option here, right? You throw 10 pulls at a discounted pull rate on in 3.2, and then try to get the remainder for Isolde during 3.3. Just make sure that you have enough for Marsha if you're going that route, right? But in talking about Mercuria, I've sort of explained her as the viable single target option in Plant Impromptu with Argus. She kind of pushes out Marcus. But with that said, that is still subject to the environment itself, right? I have to take that into account when I say things like that. So unless you have designs for Mercuria to play Mercuria specifically with Paper Heron, where what she does is she basically just AFKs there and Paper Heron does the rest with Tooth Fairy, right? Unless you have designs for playing like that for Plant Impromptu, I wouldn't recommend going beyond, you know, beyond the average pull amount to try and get Mercuria. I wouldn't go all the way to 70, right? That might be controversial to some people, but she, even with her Euphoria update, she is an older unit, and if you're playing her as DPS or a sub DPS, especially at P0, she's not incredible by any means, right? At P5 is when, you know, she's crazy, but below that, so you can use this sort of ripples, I guess, if you want to go for portraits. If you're close to her her P5, say that you're sitting at P3, then it will be a viable option if you have excess pulls. And then talking about NN Lee, I'd be very cautious about NN Lee here as well. I definitely wouldn't be pulling for NN Lee in 3.3 to build a team around her, right? I wouldn't try to use her for... She can be used for Reveries, but the thing is she's free to use in Reveries because she's part of the Euphoria banner in 3.3, so what's the point, right? And then she gets a rerun in 3.4 as well. So with that said, I don't really recommend any unit outside of just pushing your hard pity amount further through the discounted. So I would throw 10 pulls for sure on every single account. But then beyond that, I wouldn't really go after anything here in 3.3. So NN Lee, just to further explain, she's selectable in the 2.7 free selector that you can get, right? And then on top of that, she is in the 100 free pull banner as well, which I would not pick her, but you know, if you're desperate, then you can, but you're locked into that choice. She obviously has a rerun in 3.4 as well. What other conditions can we get her in? That's about it. But the thing is, you either get Mercuria or you get NN Lee, and then you call it a day, right? NN Lee is the defensive option. Mercuria is the AFK option at P0. That's just how you need to think about it if you're planning on pulling for Paper Heron. Right? Then 3.4. The Euphoria updates. I've gone in depth about the changes in my previous videos for these characters. Voyager and Regulus can be ignored completely. A Knight is here because he got a Pictomancy update. Again, ignore completely. You're not going to be pulling for A Knight's portraits in 3.4. And then Lee, again, alternative to Paper Heron's third support choice. But when it comes to a single choice here, right, I would be choosing Tooth Fairy by a long shot. So this would be one of those situations where I would recommend getting at least P1 on Tooth Fairy, and I'm gonna go more in depth about it here coming up when I talk about the free 100 pull recommendations and so on. But looking at 6 or Willow, again, it's a situation of environments, right? 6 is a sleeper unit for sure, and I kind of touched on this on my tier list video, but he has potential here in terms of people being able to use him with Liang Yue's core team, right? But ultimately, I see people just running Flutter Page or Mercuria in that instance. I'm not too sure about whether 6 would be the first priority option there. And then Willow, no environment for Willow. A substantial TPT increase, right? Changing her from a dot applicator type playstyle into an actual dot burst unit, right? Thing is, her before Tuesday Euphoria comes out, and a lot of the poison kind of rests on how Tuesday's Euphoria will actually come out. So I see indications of them continuing this trend of releasing a little more plant units. So the option is there on the table to get better Euphoria units for plant. Obviously Tuesday is spirit, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend either or character unless you have some affinity, but we're talking about meta here, right? There's just no room to be using these two characters all that much in, right? But again, if you're descending reveries, then the option is there for you to actually pull for them. But I would just, take advantage of them being Euphoria characters in 3.4 anyway. Regarding Tooth Fairy, this is where you can get an easy portrait of Tooth Fairy. But again, 100 free pulls. Yeah, so I'm just gonna move on. I feel like I'm repeating myself. I forgot where I started and where I'm ending. So in 3.2, we currently have Spathadia that's got her standard banner rerun right now, right? And then following Spathadia, it's going to be Ulrich. Ulrich, I can't recommend Ulrich. If you don't have Ulrich right now, I can't recommend spending Unilogs to pull for Ulrich at this stage of the game, right? Ulrich does allow you to cheese a lot of Reverie stages, just with like Ulrich and Ezra. Very strong duo to cheese sort of the latter stages of Reveries, but where else would you be using Ulrich other than Brume, which you don't need if you have Flutter Page, and Karen, which you don't need if you have Flutter Page. Oh wait, so not Karen, sorry. Corvus, sorry. So Ulrich's time has sort of passed us by when it comes to him being utilized in these raid environments, right? So I can't recommend pulling for Ulrich at all. And then in 3.3, now I'm listing here all the characters that released for CN, but we have to take into consideration that Blue Park made garments for Moldir and Sentinel. They also made Moldir a core part of Igor's team for 3.3, the family mechanic. We, on the other hand, on Global, just recently got a Lopera rerun, right? And then CN also got a Karen rerun during 3.3 as well. So how I foresee things going is that Moldir is going to get a standard banner rerun in 3.3 for Global, right? Followed by either a Karen rerun or a split banner that involves two of these three characters. So it's either going to be, Lopera is definitely going to be one, and then it's either going to be Sentinel or Karen. We want Karen to be on a standard banner rerun, right? Not a yearning banner. So if that happens to be the case, I'd be mildly surprised, but chances are it's going to be a Sentinel standard banner, a Moldir standard banner, followed by a Lopera and Karen yearning banner run as well, right? This would be sort of the pit stop for those who missed Karen to be able to be used with Brume, right? There's a lot of hype behind Brume, Anjo. There's still a decent amount of hype behind the Dynamo archetype itself, right? But the thing is, if you don't have Karen, the general consensus by content creators and anyone who theory crafts should be that without Karen, Dynamo is effectively hamstrung, right? So Karen plays a core role in that. So I suspect Karen will get a rerun in that fashion, right, during 3.3. So I think it should be these four characters during 3.3, even though this mirrors how 3.3 kind of went for what's it called? CN, right? On CN, what happened was Sentinel was in 3.2, Karen was in 3.2 as well, right? But I foresee this being kind of shook up a little bit for Global, obviously for revenue reasons. And then in 3.4, the reason why I put Kiparina here, and Kiparina does get a standard banner rerun for CN coming up in a couple of weeks. She is core to the sustain aspect of Plant Heron's team. Paper Heron's team. All right. So I don't think they'll be solely relying on people to be picking her on the select your own yearning. So it's likely that Global follows this trend as well, because it's such a core unit to how Paper Heron can actually perform in 3.4. And I don't think they're going to be doing a split banner again with Kiparina, based on the fact that she had a split banner just recently with Aleph, right? on global. So with that in mind, Kipperin is likely to be a standard banner rerun here. I really have a hard time predicting what's going to be for the yearning, if there is a yearning to begin with. Perhaps Rubuska is going to be part of it with, Flutter Page, for instance. So the reason why Rubuska is here is because she again gets a garment released for her. So it's a priority that people actually buy the garment. So they will pull the character, buy the garment, and so on, right? If they don't have it, the option needs to be there in order to generate revenue. In CN in 3.4, they also get a Flutter Page rerun here. I believe I think that is because of how well she performs with Liang Yue. So anticipate the Chongogong Liang Yue duo to utilize Flutter Page in a meaningful way. The problem is Liang Yue's buckets end up being heavily saturated on the crit damage aspect. It's just, I don't know. We'll have to see how things pan out. But here on the top right, I listed the average of getting a standard banner unit, right? And then for the yearning banner, the average, if you need just one character out of the yearning banner, say that you don't have one of those characters, right? If you need just one character, the average to get that character is 114 pulls, right? So extremely high. But where you would go for the yearning banner attempts is when you do need both the yearning banner characters, right? If you need both Lopera and Karen, then it's a 49 unilog to get either one of those two characters. And then once you do get your first character, you would stop there because the value just drastically diminishes beyond that point. And then, like, goes without saying, don't gamble ideally for yearning unless you're ultra desperate, which you shouldn't be, right? There's just no compelling endgame to warrant such reckless use of your unilogs. Okay. The last part here, important part nonetheless. Some of you may have heard about the 100 free pulls, right? It's called the Snow of Dusho banner. What you do is you choose one character and you're locked into that choice, right? But you have 100 free pulls on that character of your choice, and the spooks, right? If you don't hit the 50-50 for that character, end up being units from this pull specifically, right? You don't have access to everybody that has been released. So my analysis here is that the core unit to be pulling for on this banner is Tooth Fairy, right? This is where you can get Tooth Fairy if you don't have Tooth Fairy. This is where you can get portraits of Tooth Fairy very easily, right? I believe I got on both my accounts, I ended up getting 3 different characters. I think I got 2 Sotheby's and 1 Tooth Fairy on one account, and I got something bad twice on the other account. But the thing is, wait, no. I got one thing bad, but I didn't get I didn't end up hitting the next sort of pity amount, sadly, for that account, right? But the thing is, this is a great way to attempt to try and get your Tooth Fairy here. And if you luck out and you can get 2 tooth fairies, right? Getting P1 for free, basically. That's great. If you already have tooth fairy and she's not at P5, also acceptable to be pulling, right? It's just free portraits, chance of free portraits. So the ordering goes like this. I should have written it down. It should be Tooth Fairy number 1 priority, and then it's going to be Isolde. Isolde is the character in the middle here, or Semmelweis if you don't have Isolde or Semmelweis for their respective archetypes, right? Obviously, Semmelweis will be a lot lower on the rankings. You wouldn't have pulled Nordica without Semmelweis. Hopefully not. And by the time we get to the end of 3.3 or the before 3.4 begins, not having Semmelweis by then with Nordica just seems a little odd to me. But Isolde, definitely, if you just didn't have the opportunity to be able to pull for Isolde and guarantee her just because of a lack of unilogs, or you preferred securing your marsha, this is a great way to try and get Isolde here as well. Right? And then the third choice would be none other than Corvus right here. I know a lot of people skipped out on Corvus. By the time 3.4 is about to release is when Corvus's life cycle will be coming to an end, right? There's not going to be that many more Spirit Afflatus mains bulletin bosses that continuously come out, right? They're not just going to leave Corvus sitting there to keep getting value. The next time that comes into play is going to be when they release the third character or the fourth character for the Lingering Glow archetype, which will probably be further down the line. I'd probably in 3.5, so maybe she still gets another patch, but she's just had an incredible amount of longevity from 3.1 all the way to 3.4, right? So it is a way for you to get Corvus P0. I would not use this banner to get portraits for Corvus, right? You might think this is a great way to get a free portrait for a strong unit, but again, I already touched on the fact that her her usability in Mains Bulletin will be coming to an end pretty shortly. And then the other character, probably neck and neck with Corvus, is Barcarola. If you're still working on your Wailing Well descent in 3.4, then Barcarola is a decent choice here as well, right? I've already given my opinion regarding the Star Afflatus shotgun build, so go back to Plant Heron or Paper Heron and reference that if you need to. So this is the Revelation of the Water banner. It has units up to 3.4. People were confused by the silhouettes, at least in my comments, wondering if it's going to be a yearning for Aleph and Kiparina, which isn't the case. You just pick whatever character that you're missing. It goes back to this situation here where I don't know why my cuss is doing this. It goes back to this situation here where if you choose two characters that you don't own, right, then you get a great amount of value, at least, decently valuable banner to be pulling on. 49 unilogs to get either one, right? But then if you need just one character, then the value plummets. Using this banner for portraits as well, kind of questionable, considering we have either the Atomic Heart collaboration coming up after 3.4 or before 3.4. You're probably pool deficient anyway, so likely like as not, a lot of people are just going to skip this, but it is an option here for people who actually start in 3.4 to round out at least 1 or 2 decent teams to get going, right? That's what its purpose is essentially, right? Or if you missed like a key unit, but you already pulled like Brume, but you don't have Karen, right? This is another way for you to try and attempt to get that character, and so on. All right. And the last thing that we are going to cover here is the album of myths, right? In 3.4, we get this camera for free, as well as 3 tokens, right? 3 of these the film rolls, right? Just call it tokens, right? 3 tokens. You need 3 of them in order to be able to take a picture and choose one of these portraits, right? These are all extremely old units, right? You have New Babel, you have Druvis, you have Willow, you have Six, you have Tooth Fairy, you have Lilia, you have Shemaine, you have Sotheby, you have Jessica, and you have Voyager, right? Very old units. The only feasible choice here is Tooth Fairy, right? She's going to be good in your Starflatus impromptu, as well as being the core unit for Paper Heron plant impromptu, right? So this is where you get an additional Tooth Fairy portrait. We have to go back to the portrait scaling here when I talked about how easy it is to actually get Tooth Fairy's portraits, and then how easy it is to accrue this level of damage just from having a high portrait Tooth Fairy, right? Ideally, you want to be moving, in sync. So you get P1, you get P1 Tooth Fairy, you get P2, you get P2 Tooth Fairy, and so on, right? But this is another way for you to actually get a Tooth Fairy portrait for free. And then this is a permanent thing going forward. They're going to keep adding more characters, but you're not going to be able to retroactively, I believe, save up the tokens in order to get no, you're not going to be able to retroactively save up cameras. I think that's what it's going to be, right? You can save up tokens, right? So how you can get tokens is that you buy the monthly jukebox, right? And there's 2 different tiers to that jukebox. If you pick tier 1, you get 1 token. If you pick the more expensive, like $15 version, you get 2 tokens, right? So there you can get 2 tokens every patch, and then you can get 1 token using your golden cassettes. You need 70 golden cassettes in order to get 1 token, right? So you can save up tokens and build tokens, but you can't save up this camera. So this camera is what I'm assuming is going to be changing the portrait units every time a new patch rolls around, right? So we're always going to be limited to a specific camera amount. So in the event shop, right, if you do the 3.4 main story, right, there's an event shop. You can purchase another camera for 1,800 of the event tokens, or 18,000, sorry, not 1,800. So it's a significant sort of energy dump, but at the same time, it guarantees you another portrait from that pool for that patch. So in short, sorry, that was so long-winded. You can get 1 Tooth Fairy portrait for free just from this, another Tooth Fairy portrait basically for free by utilizing the monthly, or not monthly, but the patches jukebox on the more expensive version, as well as getting the third token from the shop itself, right? You're only limited to purchasing one per patch. So you're gonna get 3 that way. So 2 Tooth Fairy portraits off the bat pretty much for free. And then in the shop there's like a, like the $30 deals where they, throw in either, a free character that you can randomly pull for more recently in 3.2, or you know what I mean, right? $30 and you get basically this whole thing again, along with no, I don't think it gives you anything else, right? So you're basically paying $30 for a portrait of Tooth Fairy that way. So 3 portraits, and then you can supplement the rest by choosing Tooth Fairy here, or using the Ripples banner, right, to get Tooth Fairy at a discount. So basically, this is just like Tooth Fairy heaven for in 3.4. And that's why I decided to put her image back there. Yeah, I hope that wasn't too confusing. I wanted to cover everything that I possibly could that is sort of for certain that is gonna happen, right? Again, this is all conditional on the fact that we get Atomic Heart, sometime during between 3.3 and 3.4, right? It's highly likely that we get this collaboration during this period. If it goes beyond that, everything is going to be delayed. I just don't think that would be the correct course of action. And by that point, like, these characters that release for this collaboration need to be extremely OP. So I don't know. But I hope to cover as much as I can, and I hope I did. I hope that clarified things for you. So to reiterate, I'm not going to be quitting or anything. I'm just going to be traveling for about 2 months, right? Slightly over 2 months. So I'm not going to be having that time to actually upload videos. But so this is going to be my last little video for a little while. So hopefully that helped. And yeah, I will see you when I am back, and till next time.